Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and today it's my number 22 team in my 2024 NFL Deep Dive Series. It's the Las Vegas Raiders. Make sure to leave a like and a comment in the comment section below. It's all the things that help out with this channel and help it grow. That would be amazing. You guys are awesome. Thank you for coming and thank you for staying. And another person I think is grateful for staying is Antonio Pierce, who was the interim head coach last year, replaced Josh McDaniels. It was an absolute disaster, and the Raiders decided to keep him. Even though the players kind of blackmailed the ownership into doing it, they still did it. So it was the right decision. I think that it increases the likelihood of this team having a lot of success, because when you have a head coach that the players really want to play for, that veteran players really want to play for, that increases your likelihood of getting better and developing younger players, and also bringing in higher end free agents like we saw with Christian Wilkins, who I don't think signs with the Raiders unless Antonio Pierce is there. I honestly don't think Max Crosby is still on the team if Antonio Pierce isn't there. I don't think Devontae Adams is on the team if Antonio Pierce isn't there. So there was a huge ripple effect in that hiring. They had some changeover at quarterback. Aiden O'Connell is still there after playing a lot last year, but they brought in Gardner Minshew to sort of be like that high floor, low ceiling quarterback, who we'll get to in some more detail later about what his role is going to be and how to keep this team sort of above water throughout the year. They've set themselves up really well in terms of being able to develop some of the skill positions, develop the defense, and then sort of drop in a rookie quarterback sometime in the next couple of years. Who that's going to be, obviously, we don't know yet. The college season still has to happen this year, and probably next year as well. Carson Beck and Shedeur Sanders right now being projected to be the top two quarterbacks. Not entirely sure there's somebody that is going to light the world on fire and make teams want to invest in them outside of maybe one team in particular that could be in the top 10. I don't know if the Raiders are necessarily in that position right now. I think Gardner Minshew gives them an interesting situation to maybe be too good to be within shot of getting a top quarterback anyway. They lost Josh Jacobs. That's not great. You're kind of hoping that Alexander Madison, Zamir White, Amir Abdullah can make up for that, but it's not looking all that great in that particular room. They do have a great offensive line that I believe they improved by adding Jackson Powers-Johnson in the second round. I think they improved the receiving and the blocking with adding Brock Bowers in the first round. I think you're going to see a lot of 2 tight end sets coming out just with him and Michael Mayer. Even some 3 tight end sets with Harrison Bryant. I would look out for that as well. You're looking, though, for the offensive line coach in particular to pick up where the previous one left off. And then you get to the defense. The talent's just through the roof. There's some really young rooms, in particular the cornerback room, which we'll get to, and we'll talk about how that could be a detriment to them throughout the year, but also with how good the front four is, led by Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins, it could lead to more instinctual play, which could really make that back end of this defense really a boom or bust from week to week, we'll say. But it all begins and ends with this coaching staff, which has some really great pieces in it, and we'll start with them. So this is my 22nd ranked coaching staff here. And I think overall, this is just going to be a really well-coached team defensively above anything else. And it starts with Antonio Pierce, who's probably the most exciting new coach hire in a weird way. I mean, he was the interim coach last year, but this team really rallied around him. He seemed to really have a grasp on how to get the players to play for him. And as you know, a Giants fan, very pro Antonio Pierce. There was a lot of hope there that if the Raiders didn't get him, that he was going to be the guy to come in and be the defensive coordinator. Nice little reuniting there would have been fun, but this was the right move. The players were really into it. There was, of course, the reports of threats that the players were going to leave the team if he was not the one hired. So this is just overall the right move. You know, generally when a coach doesn't have a lot of head coaching experience and they're an interim coach, they're just like a placeholder until they go out and get somebody like the Chargers did with Jim Harbaugh type of a deal. I do like the staff that he's surrounded himself with, and it goes deeper than just Patrick Graham, who is my 7th ranked defensive coordinator. Just an absolute, he's a really fantastic defensive coordinator. He's had a lot of success with the Giants, and then coming here to Vegas. There's always this threat of a Patrick Graham defense being really good, and when he has the players that he has in place here with Max Crosby, with now Christian Wilkins, even getting some great play out of Robert Spillane, Jack Jones, a really undercover great player, Trevon Merrick is starting to develop there. It's a little late in the game for him, but right around contract extension time, he's starting to really show up. They didn't really perform well rush defense-wise, but they made all the right moves in order to improve that, particularly with Christian Wilkins coming in. But some other defensive staff or defensive adjacent staff that Antonio Pierce has added is his assistant head coach, Marvin Lewis. That's getting a big-time veteran, almost 30 years of NFL experience. He had a great run with the Bengals there for a long time, really revitalized that franchise for the most part. To have that kind of mentorship right there, that's really going to help Antonio Pierce through a lot of the early hiccups that rookie head coaches go through. Because the reality is, even though he was an interim head coach, he's still a rookie in a lot of senses when it comes to being a head coach in the NFL. Hasn't even gone a full season yet. Hasn't really been able to institute his true brand of culture that he wants to have, even though it seems that it's definitely got players motivated and wanting to be there, especially some of those high-end veterans. You look at some of the positional coaches that he has here as well. Gerald Alexander, Mike Caldwell is the linebackers coach and run game coordinator. So there's a lot of experience here in that coaching staff. Ricky Manning Jr. is your cornerback coach. Rob Ryan is your senior defensive assistant. So when you look at the defensive staff here, Antonio Pierce with Marvin Lewis, with Patrick Graham, with Rob Ryan, it's a really good staff. Mike Caldwell's a former defensive coordinator, 28 years of coaching experience. There's just so much that he surrounded himself here with. Where I think this team is really going to struggle is on the offensive side of the coaching. Now, you got Luke Getsy coming over from Chicago, who was objectively running a horrible offense. Now, how much of that was the lack of talent at quarterback? We'll see. I think there's an argument to be made there. There's a lot of evidence from the film room of a lot of receivers running wide open and Justin Fields missing them. So that has to be taken under extreme consideration when it comes to judging Luke Getsy. It's just hard to rank him highly because the Bears offense just wasn't good. And at some point, there had to have been some type of production and development in particularly Justin Fields, which Getsy didn't get out of him. So there is a concern in that sense. But much like on the defensive side, they did surround him with some good coaches, particularly Joe Philbin is their senior offensive assistant. So he sort of takes on the offensive role that they have Rob Ryan doing on the defensive side of the ball. The big loss they had was on the offensive line. Their offensive line coach, who revitalized and just accelerated the growth in a lot of careers last year, is gone. He's gone to the New York Giants. Thank you for that. And so their new offensive line coach, James Craig, I believe is his name. Yes, James Craig. He's coming over from the San Francisco 49ers. He was the assistant offensive line coach the last 2 years there. Now, depending on what kind of offense you're going to run, he could be an asset. The 49ers have had pretty good unit play from their offensive line, despite not necessarily having the best players all the time. And then also, when you're an assistant offensive line coach, how much impact did you necessarily have on the development of those players when you're the assistant offensive line coach? He was the LSU offensive line coach for a while as well before coming to San Francisco. So making that transition from being an assistant offensive line coach for the Chargers to then going and being full-on offensive line coach at LSU, then back to San Francisco. Now he gets his first real true position coach job in at least 15 years in the NFL. Sticking to one position group, I think, is an asset for him. I just think that you should expect there to be some type of step back from the offensive line's production, especially because they did lose some players too. They did get Jackson Powers-Johnson, who's sort of like a guard center hybrid. So how he transitions to guard from center, he's like a better version of Dylan Parham, who they did the exact same thing with. So how those players sort of grow together on the interior with Andre James at center will be something to watch. But overall, the concerns are on the offensive staff. Defensive staff, I think, is going to be good to go. It's going to be hard to outcoach them from an offensive coordinator's perspective, just because there's so many great minds that are going to be developing that defense every week. They're going to have to do a lot of the work beating them on the other side of the ball, forcing that offense to make mistakes, which, based on the offensive coordinator and eventually now the quarterback, it could be a likely scenario, which is why they're ranked here at 22nd and not something like 15th or 14th or 13th or something. So they went out and they got Gardner Minshew to be their quarterback, I guess compete to be the starting quarterback with Aiden O'Connell, but they're tied for 28th with Gardner Minshew. I do think he's the better option. I do think he should be the starter. Makes the most sense for me. He definitely raises the floor of what this team can be. He doesn't give you necessarily a high ceiling, but I think he's shown that he can be a serviceable bridge quarterback, coming in for, Anthony Richardson and all that. He's capable of running an offense, being effective, being smart with the ball. Now, is this something where you're basically punting this season away and you're looking at getting a quarterback next year? I don't know that Carson Beck or Shedeur Sanders or somebody that can come from that class, unless you get like a Joe Burrow rise, is necessarily going to be a better option than Gardner Minshew even next year. So maybe you just allow him and Aiden O'Connell to compete for 2 years, keep building a team around him, and then maybe you fall into a strong quarterback class like we just had. And then you can make a true move to raise the ceiling of your team after playing with a relatively high floor. That's the thing about having a quarterback like Gardner Minshew, especially with the players around him, is it does raise the floor to a point where you're probably going to be a team that is going to be really annoying to play, in the sense that I don't know that they're always at any point they're going to be out of too many games, even against really top tier teams like Kansas City. But it's going to be hard to project them beating even teams that maybe are a little worse than them, just because if they end up in a situation where they fall behind, I think it might be a little more difficult for them to come back, just because of the limitations they're going to have here at the quarterback position. Because even someone like Aiden O'Connell, I think Aiden O'Connell's got the potential to be a high-end backup. Maybe, it's a weird comparison to make, but that he could have a career similar to the one that Gardner Minshew's looking like he's going to have, which is, he can continue to develop, just be smart with the ball, don't make a lot of mistakes, run the offense the way it's supposed to be run. Don't do a whole lot of improvising outside of the structure, and he can have a long career. Minshew's basically, the way I'm looking at Gardner Minshew is he's almost like this era's Ryan Fitzpatrick, it's looking like, where he's going to bounce around from team to team, So eventually a team will give him a shot to be a starter. He'll play relatively well enough for them not to completely suck, but he won't be somebody that's going to take them over the top and make them a true contender. Going to be great for the media. He's going to be somebody the fan base is always going to love. And he's going to be somebody that the locker room is always going to love. So he's always going to be an asset to any NFL team. So I think this is a really good place for him to be right now. I think it suits the overall what Antonio Pierce sort of represents as being the head coach now. I think what the new Vegas culture for this team is looking like it's going to be built. I just think that this is the perfect first quarterback for Antonio Pierce's team to just allow him to safely institute what he wants this team to be long term while not sacrificing them short term where it might scare off upper management to maybe think that they made a mistake bringing in Antonio Pierce, which I think if they had a rookie quarterback here, they would have more ran the risk of this being a disastrous season potentially on the offensive side of the ball, which could have reflected badly on Antonio Pierce's leadership, because I do think there's still a lot of questions around Antonio Pierce. I think this hiring is viewed as a risk, a high risk, which I think does shorten his leash maybe more than Raider fans want to admit. So Gardner Minshew comes in, being your quarterback, not a high-end QB, but somehow also protects your head coach from having this typical Raider high turnover at head coach cycle that they do for the last, since John Gruden left in the early 2000s, the first John Gruden run. Now, this is where the concerns on the offense sort of begin, because in terms of just pure rushing threats, turn around, hand the ball off, they have the worst running back room in the league for that. For first and second down backs, traditional running backs, Alexander Mattison and Zamir White are going to be competing back and forth for reps here. Both, to me, are backups. They sort of run the same risk, or the same skill level, as their quarterback room. Where if you're looking at Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell and you go, that's your backup quarterback, you're like, wow, you must have a really great quarterback room. But you're looking at Alexander Mattison, Zamir White, you're going, that's your running back 2 and 3. You're like, how good is this running back room? Probably got a top 15, top 10 running back room in that sense then. That's just not the case here. The running back by committee strategy, I think, is more likely than not going to be what gets instituted as the season goes on, especially when you have Dylan Lobb, who's a rookie. You got Amir Abdullah, who's going to be your receiving back here, he's still the 30th ranked receiving back for me, just not a great backfield. I think Zamir White could quietly be somebody that they put into that role. I think Dylan Lobb as well could be that guy as the season goes on to get more reps. Especially, Amir Abdullah, a little bit older on there, even though he doesn't have as much tread on the tires. To have Zamir White, Dylan Lobb, and then Alexander Mattison, who they just brought in as a free agent, to dedicate more reps to them as the season goes on, I think is the most likely of scenarios here. But not exactly a very high ceiling or necessarily a high floor either for this running back room. This could prove to be a real disaster for them, I think. It is putting Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell in a situation where they may be forced to win games with their arm. And that's not the situation you want to be in. Having a quarterback like Gardner Minshew and having an offense coordinator Luke Getsy and having a senior advisor like Joe Philbin, you would think that they would have wanted to pay Josh Jacobs and keep Josh Jacobs around so they could have a high-end running back that they could rely on to take on 50%, so they can run the ball 50% of the time every week comfortably and give an out and give more comfortability and open up the play action game and give less predictability to what you're going to be doing depending on who is the running back in the backfield. Because when you have Josh Jacobs back there, you could be doing anything. It could be a screen game. You could be running Texas. You could be, running him out in the flats. You could be doing a million different things there. You could just be turning around, handing the ball off, even if it's third and medium. There's a real threat there still with a guy like Josh Jacobs that you're going to run a draw play and catch this defense off guard, and he's going to find a hole and get the first down, carry some guys for some extra yards there. That doesn't exist here anymore. So you've taken a step back in that sense, which I think overall gives the offense an entire step back. Now, if Amir Abdullah ends up showing up as a great receiving back, or if the rookie Dylan Lobe, how do you pronounce that? Lobe, turns out to be, a really great situational player for the entire season, then it does open up the game a little bit. But I think that they're going to have to show that talent more as a traditional early down running back. So that competition, as we progress through OTAs, as you go through training camp, as you go through the preseason games, even as you go throughout the actual regular season, is going to be a key thing to watch to how that turns out. And I think there will be a direct correlation between the overall performance of the offense in that sense. Now, to sort of counter what you had of the running back room, the weapons room, starting with the wide receivers, tied for 10th in the league. You got a true high-end number one in Davante Adams, who his skill set, I think, best suits what this offense is going to be able to effectively do with a quarterback like Gardner Minshew. You get a great route runner and a quarterback who's not going to make a lot of mistakes. That's really the perfect scenario for Davante Adams to maybe not necessarily have a high yards per reception rate, but I could see him and then his wide receiver 2, Jacoby Myers, both hovering around that 100 reception mark, but probably more around like 1,000 of maybe 1,100 yards to 900 yards of receiving, and just sort of being like a methodical extension of the run game that they're clearly going to be lacking, at least early in the year. They did sign Michael Gallup, who got a big extension from the Cowboys at the time that it was an extension, but his injuries have really held him back. So him coming in, being a wide receiver 3, perhaps even a wide receiver 4, because they do have Trey Tucker, who had really great moments last year. This is a very solid wide receiver room with a variety of different skill sets that are going to make Gardner Minshew's job a lot easier. And then even if you go into the tight end room where they drafted Brock Bowers, they're walking in with the 12th best tight end room here. Brock Bowers gets an 84. Michael Mayer, who they drafted last year in the second round, gets a 74. So even in your tight end room, you get this nice variety here where you can come out in these 2 tight end sets with Davante Adams and Jacoby Myers out wide. And then you have Gallup coming in, who you can ease into getting him back to NFL playing speed, NFL playing health, by not having these expectations on him where he has to perform at a high level and where your offense is sort of reliant on that as well. But just a really, really good group here. They've done a good job of building it. Jacoby Myers was sort of a punchline last year or 2 years ago. Really showed up last year, proved to be a real strong player. I think his development will only continue with so much focus being on Davante Adams, with a veteran presence like Michael Gallup, with Brock Bowers now in there, with Michael Mayer. So many opportunities are going to open up for Jacoby Myers, and I think he's got a real opportunity to end up being a high-end number 2 wide receiver by the end of the year. And then the Raiders could be walking in as things develop with like a true top 10, undisputed top 10 weapons group. And then you're really just looking to replace the backfield and get some more high-end, high-upside backfield play from your running backs and then eventually your quarterback. And you're going to be able to drop a quarterback, a young rookie quarterback, into one hell of a situation here. just with the weapons that they have, pending that Brock Bowers turns out to be good, there is a bit of a stigma around how well these top 15, top 10 caliber tight ends end up performing in the NFL. TJ Hawkinson took a while to come along. Kyle Pitts has never really come along, but you can blame that maybe on the scheme that Arthur Smith has been running. Noah Fant really never turned out to be all that great. OJ Howard is another one that comes to mind immediately. I know it took a while for David Njoku to become a top flight tight end in the league. So there are question marks around Brock Bowers. Personally, I think he's coming in with a strong George Kittle comp, which will work out well for them in the run game long term, help out with their offensive line. Michael Mayer can be, more of a receiver. They can make, and I'm not even necessarily talking down about Michael Mayer's ability on early downs, but it does create a nice little rotation here where you can sort of end up like how you're going to be with the running back room, where it's going to be hard for teams to really predict what you're going to be doing because the skill sets of the players can be conducive to both aspects of the game. And I think Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer will give that sense of, making the defense have to think that little extra step and not being able to necessarily predict as much based upon personnel, because you're going to be able to line up Brock Bowers or Michael Mayer as like a bigger slot receiver. You're going to be able to split Brock Bowers way out wide, have Jacoby Myers playing the slot, create these weird matchup issues. So I would look for that variety to come into play and have a sneaky, efficient passing game in general coming out of the Raiders with this variety of talent and the depth, to be honest, because then even in the tight end room, Harrison Bryant, nothing to be sneezed at as in terms of a tight end 3. That's a really strong tight end 3 to have as well. So they're going to be able to mix and match and cause headaches at least for defensive coordinators. Moving on to the offensive line, and they have the 4th ranked pass blocking group here for the offensive line. Colton Miller, top end left tackle in the NFL. Andre James, top end center in the NFL. Jackson Powers Johnson, an absolute steal, should have been a first round pick. Top end rookie interior offensive lineman. And then you just have 2 real weaknesses, which they're compared to other weaknesses in the NFL. There's some offensive lines in the NFL where these are like top 2, top 3 pass blockers on the team, and they're the bottom 2 on the Raiders because of how strong the talent is coming in. Dylan Parham gets a 67th there. Munford gets a 66, but there, Munford's game has never been about pass blocking, really. He's more of that run blocking threat that we'll get to. But it's just a well-balanced offensive line. Andre James has developed into being such a great center. Him and Colton Miller, the inside and out are basically the same. They're both really strong in both aspects of the game. When you look at some of the depth here, they brought in Andreas Pete, who I'm not particularly high on, but they added some rookies here like DJ Glaze and Clark Barrington, who are going to be able to step in the event that you pick up some type of injury, or you need to, maybe you pick up an interior offensive line injury and you got to move Thayer Munford inside. DJ Glaze can step in at right tackle, and then you're good to go. There's a lot of interesting depth here. I think that it will be a inexperienced group by the time they make all their cuts and anything. I think Andrews Pete, despite being lackluster at best for the New Orleans Saints throughout his career, because of his experience, is going to make this team, and his experience to be able to play inside and out will help him make the team. But I really like DJ Glaze coming in here, because even when you get to the running game here, they're the 5th ranked run blocking group. where really DJ Parham is the only weak link here, and that has a lot to do with his size. He's a very undersized interior offensive lineman. But you get Thayer Munford, Jackson Powers-Johnson, and Andre James. They're going to be maulers out there. Colton Miller is also a very good run blocking tackle. And then when you get to the depth, DJ Glaze takes a giant step back. So that's really where his game needs to be developed, is in that sense. So that's where Andreas Pete probably gets the leg up on him, especially early in the year, to come in and be sort of your sixth offensive lineman. I think that's really where Andreas Pete starts the season, as that offensive lineman 6, where he'll step in at both tackles or both guards if need be. Cody Whitehair is probably going to be your backup center, even though, I don't know, man. He was okay in Chicago, had some good years, and then just completely regressed. He comes over with Luke Getsy, which, I mean, again, inheriting aspects of a very terrible offense from just a year ago, doesn't project well. But I think as DJ Glaze can sort of develop as the year goes along, you're hoping that he can be somebody by the end of the year that becomes that swing tackle for you. And then Andreas Pete sort of settles in as your backup interior offensive lineman, because Jackson Powers-Johnson can just go into center, where it's more of his natural position anyway from Oregon, if you need him to, because of something happens to Andre James, God forbid, or he has to step in for Dylan Parham, because Dylan Parham's just getting overwhelmed by power playing on the interior. He's going to be going up against guys like Chris Jones, for example, so that could continuously prove to be an issue for them with this conversion of moving Dylan Parham to guard after being a center at Memphis. So other than that, there's no weak spot that I can project. Jackson Powers-Johnson will have his rookie moments, but he's surrounded by, in the run game, he's surrounded by Andre James and Thayer Munford if he plays on the right. If he plays on the left, it's Colton Miller, who has all this wealth and experience, who's going to help him in pass blocking. So there's a lot of, it's really great to put in a guy with that type of ceiling, with that type of potential, with that kind of upside, and he's basically coming in as the third or fourth best offensive lineman you have. So it's not like a lot of these situations that you're seeing where these rookies are coming in, getting thrust into starting spots because they're expected to be the second or third best, the second best offensive lineman, sometimes the best offensive lineman right out the gate. There's just a lot of upside here. Now, how the new offensive line coach keeps everything together the way the previous one did, that's up in the air. That's the real question mark coming in. But I think as a pure talent level, it's hard to find a better overall offensive line than what the Raiders are going to be putting out on the field. So just running through a quick positional summary here. The wide receiver and tight end blocking gets a C grade. They're just a decent group. They're a decent group, not a high-end group, but a decent group. Where they're really going to struggle is, in the running back room. Not a high-end running back room. They have an interesting depth at wide receiver. They have 4 really good ones, I would say. They're going to have a good 4 rotation there. After that, there's not a lot going on. There is a significant drop-off once you get to wide receiver 5 and 6, which you hope doesn't really necessarily play that big of a factor. The run blocking on the offensive line could become an issue if the wrong guy picks up an injury, particularly Thayer Munford or Andre James. That will drag you down quite a bit. Certainly probably out of the top 10 if you lose one of those top 2 guys. But you're coming in great. Top 5 run blocking, top 5 pass blocking. The efficiency level of this offense, like I keep going back to, seems to be with a high floor, just lacking that high ceiling, where once you put in that high upside quarterback, it could really change this entire offense to being a true top 10 offense in the NFL. But overall, they have the 22nd ranked offense with a 75.46, tied for 18th in overall pass offense and tied for 26th in overall rushing offense. Again, the running back room could serve a great purpose here in the run game, improve them, get them into that top 20 spot, and bump the offense into the top 20 if they can develop a true number one running back, or at least get number one running back play out of two guys, I would say. Now let's move on to the defensive side of the ball, and this is really where the stars of the show are going to be. They have the number 4 ranked edge room for me in terms of pass rush. You start with Max Crosby, gets a 95, one of the best, top 3 or 4 in the league at worst. And his complement is Malcolm Kuntz, who last year, the second half of the season, really came on. And how much of that is a direct correlation to Antonio Pierce taking over, I don't know, because Josh McDaniels was an offensive coach. How much that motivated him, maybe created more opportunities, maybe there was some slight changes in philosophy that occurred, maybe it was just motivation, maybe it was just revitalized enthusiasm, or maybe it's just a light bulb going off. It's hard to say, but I think he did establish himself as a solid number 2 option to a legitimate elite number 1 option in Max Crosby. Now, their depth here is not particularly great. They got 2 rookies who are coming in with that skill set. They don't really have another true edge, though, that I think could be reliable as a number 3. Snowden, Robinson, Ellerson Smith, it's just not there. So that's a bit of a concern. As you move on to the interior, though, Christian Wilkins, a big free agency signing there. Adam Butler, those are going to be your 2 guys coming in for that. Tyree Wilson, who's I guess he's an interior defensive lineman. He's not your traditional edge rusher. He's not somebody that should be playing on the edge in these pure passing situations. You want him to sort of kick into the interior. He sort of gives me Trayvon Walker vibes in the sense that he was picked highly, but I think the expectations of early dominance needed to be tempered because it was probably a 2 to 3 year project. So we'll see how he continues to develop under those circumstances. It's really going to be a 3-man interior rotation, I think, throughout the year with Christian Wilkins, John Jenkins, and Adam Butler. But again, 4th for their edge room, and they're tied for 7th with the interior room. When you get 2 high-end number 1s in these position groups, it really does raise up the quality of the entire group altogether. So, Byron Young is another guy. Was a rookie last year. He's somebody that maybe should be looked at as a developmental project who could rise up, who could steal some snaps as the season goes on once you get to that mid-late season mark, and you want to increase the interior defensive line rotation in particular. Moving on to the linebacker coverage, and there's not a whole lot here. You're tied for 27th with the linebacker coverage. Not happy about this. I have to say, it's not a great group in particular. You're kind of just stuck with hoping that Robert Spillane and Divine Diablo, Tommy Eichenberg also can develop into being reliable 3-down linebackers, because Spillane is more like your 2-down linebacker, early down linebacker, and we'll get to that. But Luke Masterson, is he really your best coverage linebacker? You're hoping that, again, developing these guys as the season goes on, but this has always been an aspect of the Raiders team for the last couple of years that have truly been lacking. It was this in the interior defensive line. They went out and got Christian Wilkins. So it'll be interesting to see. Maybe they're just one off-season cycle away from also adding that alpha linebacker, because Antonio Pierce being when he was in his playing career, being that alpha Mike linebacker, he was the green dot linebacker, as they say, the green dot player on the field, 3 downs, high-end linebacker. Him wanting to find one, I think, it's going to be something high on his list. You see it with DeMeco Ryans in Houston, throwing a lot of assets, free agency and otherwise, at that linebacker position, trying to land that true number one guy, and hoping in the process maybe you get a couple guys out of it, but still sort of searching for that number one guy. And I think you'll see the same pattern from Antonio Pierce as his coaching career moves along here with the Raiders. So now going to the cornerbacks, they got the 22nd ranked cornerback room. It's going to be an interesting year for this position group. You got Jack Jones, who has this ability to be a number one corner, makes a lot of mistakes, but that's due to that aggressive play that he has. He's a very smart player. Size can become an issue for him, but he's very instinctual. And if he can continue to develop and keep the off the field issues to a minimum, you could find what maybe the Patriots had in him in his rookie year and continue to develop off of that. DeCarrion Johnson or Rob Richardson and Nate Hobbs. It's another high floor group that this team has that doesn't necessarily have the highest ceiling. That's sort of the story of this team, it seems, for a lot of these positional groups. Then you get into the depth here. MJ Devonshire, Brandon Facyon, Jacorian Bennett, Will Governor, Jaquan Shepard, Sam Webb. It's a lot of guys who you're just trying to find a place for, who, Richardson might not even be an actual corner. He could be somebody that could, Demakari could become more of a safety, like a third safety perhaps. There is the potential for that. So how they navigate these cornerbacks throughout the year is going to be a really interesting development, especially because there are so many young players here. I think Brandon Facyon might have the most time in the NFL. I could be wrong, but there's a lot of youth here. And then you move to the safety room. You get Trayvon Merrick. It's the 26th ranked safety room. It's going to be another interesting case study here. Trey Taylor's got some ability. Chris Smith has some ability. Marcus Epps is more going to be your early down safety. So how they maneuver these guys around throughout the year and situation to situation, drive to drive, quarter to quarter. Now they're going to be protected by the high-end front four play. I think that's going to raise up the entire group altogether. But if for some reason that front four is not performing well, I think there could be a lot of potential issues on the back end that they're going to have to deal with throughout the year. Now we're going to move on to the run defense, and we'll start with the edge group, tied for 6th. Max Crosby might be the most all-around, well-rounded edge player in the entire league. He's a high-end edge rusher for the pass, and he's a high-end edge player against the run. Really carries this group. Janarius Robinson, this is where he's going to get some play, is on these early downs. Even though Malcolm Kuntz is not even that bad at it, I think he's somebody that you're going to want to see part of more of a rotation with Robinson, so you can get high-end pass rushes out of Kuntz throughout the year, and you're not wasting him on early downs when you have comparable to better players that can play that position during a game. I think it should just be smarter that way. Their interior defensive line does take a bit of a step back. Still tied for 19th. Christian Wilkins is a great run stuffer. Adam Butler, John Jenkins, Matthew Butler, and Tyree Wilson again. How those guys integrate around Christian Wilkins throughout the year, situation to situation, is going to be something to watch. But I think that there's a lot of similarities in terms of ability between all these players. So I think the rotation will be healthy. Here on these early down situations, though, if Christian Wilkins is off the field, there is a significant drop, and you are approaching worst group in the NFL just because there's not a lot of depth here in that sense, and you're kind of hoping that you get some development out of somebody. Again, I'm sort of looking at Byron Young as being that guy you're hoping to get development as a true interior defensive lineman, because Tyree Wilson you're hoping develops as well. But he's somebody who on these early downs you probably would want at defensive end anyway, so you're hoping that he can develop into being somebody that can flip back and forth with Janarius Robinson and keep Malcolm Kuntz solely as your second pass rusher in true passing situations. And I think that would raise the entire group up to a much higher level. But now this is really where the linebacker group steps up against the run to make up for some of those deficiencies they have on the interior defensive line. Because you got Luke Masterson, you got Robert Spillane, who's one of the best, the absolute best linebackers on early downs just a year ago. And you're hoping he can continue that. And he's got the right head coach in place. He's got the right staff in general in place to help make that happen. Amari Gaynor, who, for everything that he could be against the pass, not going to be great against the run. Not somebody that you want out there necessarily in those situations. You're hoping Tommy Eichenberg can develop a bit and be maybe, your third or fourth linebacker throughout most of the year. And you're hoping Divine Diablo can continue to develop as a linebacker after playing safety throughout college. Playing linebacker is a relatively new role for him since coming into the NFL. He's sort of been like a linebacker safety hybrid. Like that dime linebacker type role. So him playing a more traditional linebacker role with this defensive staff, I think you can see some accelerated development from him potentially as well. But a very strong group on the top end here with these two starters. Now in terms of DB run support, this is where, again, 22nd group, Trayvon Merrick, Marcus Epps, Isaiah Polamau, who I would really like to see him in passing situations. You don't want to see him on these early downs. He is not going to contribute at all in run defense. He's not somebody you want out there in those situations. I like him third and long. You throw him out there at safety, moving guys around in the secondary, creating exotic looks. He's somebody who can be an asset. Trayvon Merrick's your number one. Chris Smith, you're hoping can develop. He was somebody who was looked at as a really great safety prospect for a while. Just sort of bounced around the transfer portal and then didn't really reach the heights that people were projecting him to reach and sort of fell out of favor. People sort of forgot about him. I would like to see him continue to develop and maybe be somebody who's under the radar who could end up being a real contributor to this team throughout the year. But I just don't know what aspect of the game that's necessarily going to be in. Quick positional summaries here. I will say the cornerbacks that they have, they get an A in terms of the run support, particularly Jack Jones. Very aggressive in the run game. I like Nate Hobbs as well. So it's going to be a good group when it comes to protecting those outside runs. You're going to get some good tackling out there. Not a lot of lazy play that you usually could see from cornerbacks in the run game, and it's going to help out, with the setting that second edge for the defensive ends, particularly when you get Nate Hobbs. Jack Jones can play a little bit inside as well. Just overall, it's a tale of two different groups with two particularly different skill sets. So you have an interior group that's really good against the pass to sort of help out a linebacker group that's not, and then vice versa in the run game. The concerns are obviously in some of the depth here. The cornerback room is going to be very young. Unless they bring in some veterans, it's going to be a very young group. But other than that, I think the upside of this defense is so high because the front four is going to be so strong throughout the entire year. That's going to allow it's conducive for the skill sets of the guys on the back end, particularly Jack Jones, to play super aggressive and to make plays and to force turnovers, which I think could be in abundance this year. So overall, they have the 9th ranked defense, 20th against the pass. I feel like that is about the floor, though. I think maybe 22nd best pass defense is as low as they would get this year. Again, the ceiling is just very dependent on the front four's play. 3rd best rush defense, though, with really strong edge play, really strong DB support, and really strong linebacker play. That's really all you need. And you got a high-end number 1 interior defensive line against the run with Christian Wilkins. So there's just a lot of real good talent here, and they're going to be coached really well, which is going to help them, I think, really sustain a top 10 defensive ranking. So overall, they are my 22nd ranked team. They have the 22nd ranked coaching staff, 22nd ranked offense, and the 9th ranked defense. But a lot of upside here, particularly with the coaching staff. And with some of the offensive play, again, figure out a couple things on the offense, and they could accelerate themselves into the top 20. The coaching staff could easily, by the end of the year, be top 15. And then you're looking at a fringe playoff team who I think with a strong 2025 offseason could be looking at as a high-level contender. And there you have it, my number 22 team in my 2024 NFL Deep Dive Series, the Las Vegas Raiders. Thank you guys for coming again. Leave a like and a comment in the comment section below. Helps out with the algorithms. Not every comment's been positive, and it's kind of hurting my feelings. But I do keep my receipts, and I will be back to say I told you so in certain situations. So we'll see how this comment section goes. Leave it in the comment section below. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys with the next video next time.